A lot of people here know me. I've had a background in health. My name is Dennis O'Connor. I run a channel called Awakening in Health. It's on YouTube. I've got a website called Awakening in Health, and I like to inform people about the things that I guess the mainstream are telling us about health, that they're misleading us with. And a lot of this, well, some of the stuff I do actually seems to tie in a fair bit with with things that we might call esoteric. And when you start digging into the kind of more esoteric stuff, it throws open a really kind of big, I guess, Pandora's box of stuff that I think is important for everybody to know about. So sometimes I'll stick a little bit more so to the mainstream health stuff, but then I also do like to dabble around some of that more interesting historical stuff. So this chat today is going to be a little bit more around that historical stuff. So the title of this one is going to be The Things You Presumed Were Unrelated to Health, from the Pyramids to esoteric health. Okay? So my background, I did a lot of work in intensive care, and then I did drug and alcohol and a few other areas. But when I was preparing for this talk, I had a bit of a think back to something that happened when I was in Gosford, which is where Adam is from. I remember this nurse I used to work with. She used to describe herself as a psychic. And, I was fairly skeptical back at that stage. It's about, 15 odd years ago, something like that. And one of the gifts she was saying that she had was to read photographs. So what you do is you'd put a photograph face down on a table. She wouldn't be anywhere near it, and then she'd describe this photograph. So one day during lunch, I decided to challenge this woman. And we should be good for noise. I started to challenge her, and I said, okay, I've got a photograph. I'd like you to try and read it. So I put my photograph face down on this table, and she basically just looked really confused for about 30 seconds. So she said, "Listen, I'm not too sure if I can read this photograph. I don't know. I don't know really what to think about it." And I'm kind of sitting back in my chair, going, "Yeah, I knew it. Yeah." And she said, "But all I can think of is I don't know whether to try and be really serious or to burst out giggling. I feel like a little child when I try to analyze this." And the photograph was from about a year before, and it was of my daughter. And when my daughter used to put on an artificial smile, she kind of had a little bit of a funny smile, but when she smiled naturally, she had the most beautiful glowing smile. So what I wanted to do was I wanted to just capture a picture of her. She would have been about 5, I think, at the time, 4.5. I wanted to capture a picture of her natural smile. So the way I was doing that was I was going, okay, this is a serious photograph now, and I don't want you to smile. So what's a kid going to do when you tell them not to smile? They are going to try and break into a smile. And what this woman basically did was she captured exactly that experience. She said, I really want to be serious, but I can't help it. I feel like giggling. And I'm going, ooh, that's a little bit weird. Okay? So I use that as an example to illustrate that there's more going on. Yeah, grab a seat. Yeah, please. There's more going on in relation to the world we are told exists than we are given to believe. Okay, and that's a good. I think that's a nice illustration. So then, because I worked in mainstream health, you venture towards looking at some of the more alternative things, and chiropractors spring to mind. Because I'd get asked questions, are chiropractors any good? And for a good few years, I would do a search on the safety of chiropractor, and you just see these reports after reports, especially on Google, of 5 years ago, a chiropractor killed a baby, they broke his neck. Woman never walked again after a chiropractor. So all this, the information that we can search is heavily edited. And now, if you think about it, if you went into any hospital, doing a search is a bit different. If you go into any hospital and go into any ward, you will see somebody on a ward who has been medically harmed. It is just that simple. But if you try and do a search on that, it'll be vague and ambiguous. So you'll have one baby who maybe had their neck broken, I don't know, in 30 years ago by a chiropractor, and yet every single day, every probably hour, there are people getting killed in hospitals or getting seriously maimed in hospitals. And you don't see this getting thrown in front of you. So there's obviously an unweighted balance towards alternatives to health. So then, this takes us down this starts us to ask the question, why is it set up like this? What's going on? And when we start to venture down towards some history that we have around the world, things start to get clearer. So initially I'm going to kind of take a little bit of a history detour, and then we'll kind of get back to health. And the idea is to try and, I guess, have a clearer idea as to what's really going on. Another odd thing when we talk about esoteric stuff and health is, I'm from Ireland, you might be able to tell from my strange accent. But we had these places, like Knock was a place, I think it was in Cork. We had pilgrimages to Lourdes, which is in France. So, we used to have holy water in our corridors, and people would take the holy water and put it on themselves. And you had these stories after stories of people coming back who were miraculously cured. You'd have people who were in wheelchairs coming back walking, people who were supposedly blind, who could see again. And they'd either bathed in water, or they'd been blessed by somebody, or, we had this phenomenon of moving statues at one stage, which could have been a kind of a collective group psychosis, I don't know. But it's even in medical literature where people have gone to some of these holy and spiritual sites, and they've had things fully reversed. Okay, so this is actually recorded in the mainstream in medical literature. It's quite phenomenal. I used to look at stuff, this psychic surgery. Has anybody heard of psychic surgery, where these guys are fiddling around with their hands and little bits of blood are flying around? And again, when you look into, is this possible? It's always debunked. And when I was in school, I remember I probably was about 14 maybe in school, and we had a science project, and the thing I was really fascinated about this esoteric stuff. And this is before we had the internet in the way it looks now. This is back in, 85 or whatever. I shouldn't be giving my age away. And so I had to go to the library and do my research. So I was looking at, I was kind of very young and not open to any of this kind of stuff. And when I went down the route of looking at some of this more esoteric stuff, like pyramids and whatnot, it was again always debunked. There was always a reason for it. And sometimes the reasons were really fanciful. Now, as I know a little bit more, I don't think it was as straightforward as what we're told in the mainstream. Okay? So, we've got a H.L. Mencken. He was a journalist, satirical journalist, and he's got a good quote. And his quote goes like this: "The aim of public education is not to spread enlightenment at all. It is simply to reduce as many individuals as possible to the same safe level, to breed standard citizenry, to put down dissent and originality." And that really says it all. Okay, this is why the school systems were created in the forms that we see them in. Okay, and it certainly goes down when we think about ancient history. We're certainly fed a very strict narrative. Okay, and when we can actually look around at other stuff in relation to ancient history, we realize that maybe what we're hearing is not accurate. So there's an Indian book. It's called I can never pronounce this properly, the Bharadwaj. Okay. And there's a couple of scholars, Ameya Jada, from Mumbai University, and she breaks down some of the information in these ancient books. And in particular, you got these things called Vimanos, which essentially are spacecrafts. Okay. And the fascinating thing when she breaks it down is they describe the components of metal used in these spacecrafts. Okay, you've had metallurgists, this is quite a while ago, actually put the components of metal together, and they verified that what is in these ancient books actually is scientifically accurate. And they talk about you have to mix, I think it was steel, this from this level with steel from this level, and you have to mix it in these proportions, and this gives you the lightest kind of metal for flight. It's all accurate. They talk about transatlantic crossings, what pilots should wear, what to eat before, what to eat afterwards. They talk about how you recover. So this is prehistoric, just about. It's quite insane. Okay, so either somebody back here had a very vivid imagination, or there's more going on than we think, or these scholars are just lying and misinterpreting ancient Indian knowledge. Then we can branch into the pyramids. So I think we all know about the Giza pyramids, and we know that they're based on sacred geometry. The list of coincidences or amazing anomalies with the pyramids is just profound. The ratios that the pyramids are built in, and we have pyramids on every single continent. We've got pyramids in Brazil, we got pyramids in Mexico, we got pyramids in Europe. Okay, we may have a local pyramid here. It's quite fascinating. This is something I've talked to with Adam before about the Carryong or the Gosford glyphs. Okay, so I used to live in Gosford and I never got to see these things. Hello again. I never got to see these things, so I'm really disappointed. But right around the corner, fairly close to where I used to live, there's a little canyon with hieroglyphs on it. And again, this has been debunked, okay? And it tells the story of these Egyptians who landed in Australia and built pyramids. And they actually point to one of the pyramids being locally here. Walsh's Pyramid. So there's actually a little bit of evidence that Walsh's Pyramid is actually a genuine pyramid. I saw quite a fascinating interview of a Egyptian scholar who studied hieroglyphs, who was given the hieroglyphs to read to verify whether these things were genuine or not. And what he was saying is, he said at the time when these were meant to be written or discovered, there was probably only 2 to 3 people in the world who would have the knowledge to write what was on that wall, because it was a little bit before the normal, apparently some of the hieroglyphs were back to front before it was changed from front to back. So he said that there was, at that time, only a handful of people in the world who knew about hieroglyphs getting reversed. Okay? And apparently the fact that some of the hieroglyphs were reversed is some of the reasons why they're debunked. They were put there by scholars from, I don't know, Newcastle University or something crazy like that. So this Egyptologist is basically saying that this stuff is legit.
Are you talking about the carry-on?
Yeah, carry-on glyphs, yeah. That's right. It's quite incredible. Never got to see it. There's an interesting ex-school teacher, Stephen Strong. Has anybody heard about some of the stuff this guy talks about? He's again in Australia. I think he's in New South Wales. And he had a bit of a fascination for ancient history in Australia. So he had lots of different things sent to him. And if you listen to some of his chats, he's got examples of these giant knives, these giant rings. He sent them off to metallurgists again. And the composition is absolutely unique. Scientists can't explain where this mix of metals have come from. And this is in Australia. He also has a collection of elongated skulls and different types of bones. And he had government agencies that have shut him down. He apparently, his collection he cannot take outside his property. If he does, he will go to jail. And this is in Australia. And when you see these things that he's showing you on his YouTubes, the authority at which he describes these things is quite convincing. Either he is very intent on putting forward an absolutely ingenious, elaborate hoax to destroy his reputation and get no money, or the stuff he's talking about has some legitimacy. I tend to think it's the latter. Again, I don't know. Speaking of elongated heads, I presume we've heard of the elongated heads. Everybody here? These fossils that are found that are really, so there's instances of elongated skulls in fossils all over the world, and these are not shaped like ours. Okay, they have got a much bigger cranial capacity. The way you have a phenomena where heads got bound, where babies' heads got bound, and the way that those heads end up shaping is totally different from the elongated heads. The capacity, there's lots of differences. There's lots of changes with sutures, etc., etc. So it does look like these heads don't belong to humans, but they were around there. Lots of stories from the Smithsonian Institute. Have you heard of that? Anybody? So of these guys, as soon as there's a discovery about certain fossils and certain skeletons from, I don't know, hominids, humans, these guys are first on the scene. They commandeer the fossils and the stories get hidden. So you've got letters from ex-directors and ex-specialists in the Smithsonian in their diaries from quite a long time ago saying that these guys are stealing and hiding our history from us. And I tend to believe that's accurate. Anybody heard of a fellow called Lloyd Pye? That's where he's only got a few videos out there, but watch some of his stuff. Absolutely fascinating. He's a researcher. He's passed away now, and he kind of really blew my mind when he started talking about evolution and the flaws in evolution. And we've got and even Darwin himself in his book has said that this book is not conclusive. And I'm sure that down the line, we're going to be we're going to have different information that will add to my theories. So Pye, he talks about the fact that, and this is actually a medical fact, the fact that every single animal has 24 chromosomes. We've got 23, and our first and second is double the length. So his suggestion is that we have an element of genetic modification back in the day. And he also talks about how we're told evolution goes. And when we look at evolution, if we think about monkeys and then we think about apes and we think about gorillas, we've got this evolution of a stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger being. But then all of a sudden, we're advancing, and then humans with our frail bones and our feet and our knees were apparently not so well adapted to the planet compared to apes and whatnot. I personally don't think we come from apes anyway, but there's a lot of anomalies, okay? Thanks, Beck. Okay, so we're going to skip a little bit back to the pyramids. There's an interesting fellow called Patrick Flanigan. He's another guy who's passed away. And he wrote a book in the 70s called I think Pyramid Power was the name of that book. And some of the information in that book is just quite phenomenal. So he identifies, along with other people, he visited the pyramids about 300 times, of the Giza pyramid being done in sacred geometry, which is a thing called phi, not pi, but phi, which is a ratio of 1:1.6. If I could reach that board, if I'd choke, I'd show you something interesting. So basically the base is square, and the height of the pyramid fits in with the base of the pyramid in this ratio of phi. And I'm not sure if it was him or somebody else, on one of their many visits to the Giza pyramids, they noticed that there were bins of dead animals in these pyramids, okay? And they asked the curators, what's going on with these dead animals? And the curators said that animals would get lost in the pyramids, so these guys would come around, pick up the animals, chuck them in a bin. But the interesting thing was the animals would not decompose. They would mummify, okay? So there was no smell of all these animals. And the guy was asking, how long do they last for? They said indefinitely until we take them out. We don't have to rush to take these animals out. We just leave them there, wait till the bin is full, we take them out. So I've nearly had the name of that guy on the tip of my head, tip of my tongue, should I say. So essentially he went and started researching different ratios and whatnot. And what he found was if he built small pyramids or large pyramids to the ratio of phi, phi, he found that he could put food under these pyramids and it would not rot. Okay? He also found that rotting meat, for example, if it had things like maggots in it, the maggots would either leave the meat or not go back inside. Okay, there's a guy in Russia. I remember this from years ago. Who remembers putting the thing where you had your razor blades under a pyramid? Yeah. Okay, that actually is absolutely just this guy in Russia. I can't remember how he came on discovering it, but he was connected to people in the Russian army. And as soon as he was talking to them, every soldier in Russia had their pyramids that they had their razors under. So they ended up going through significantly less razor blades. It was a real economic boom. And I see that now something similar is being sold online. Last time when I looked at telly, they were advertising these things. So pyramids can manipulate energy. Okay. Apparently people, when they're sitting in these pyramids for meditation, can have very interesting meditative experiences. And interestingly, you have to align these pyramids from north to south. If you turn them around, they lose their power. So that there's stuff that we are automatically told, or it's not automatically told, but you get the eye roll. You get the whole, hey, that's rubbish. Don't look at that. Okay? And all this stuff will come back to us and relate to our bodies. So it's very important when we look at this stuff and we're thinking about health. Okay. So here's the why. And we're going to take a little bit of a segue down to some of the stuff that's a little bit more distasteful. Okay? I had a very interesting chat with a friend of mine a couple of days ago. And one of the comments, he's kind of a little bit more normal, you might say. He doesn't go down that esoteric stuff a little bit more. And one of the comments he made was, just be careful if you kind of take the discussion too far down that more kind of strange area, you might lose credibility. Okay? And I said, what do you mean? He said, and we kind of talk about cryptocurrency together. So he said, when I listen to people with cryptocurrency, if they start throwing out these kind of side balls and whatnot, he said, I have to doubt everything they say. But there's a really important expression, and the expression is, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Okay? There's lots of valid information in what a lot of people say. And the reason I think that's relevant is we have to, I guess, treat everything with a little bit of skepticism. But we can also take information that we find is valid, and we can take information that overlaps. So when we're trying to get to the bottom of what's going on with the world and what's going on with health now, I I'm standing here delivering this, saying I don't truly know. I'm not too sure. So my job, I think, my role is to try and deliver as much information that as I have found to people who don't know that information. So that can be a shortcut for them. So hopefully they're not taking all these meandering routes that I've taken before I've managed to get to the place I wanted to be, especially when it comes to health. So then we kind of, as I said, are getting to that distasteful stuff. This is just my conclusion now, this is subjective on my part, is I think that there is a balance of good and evil. And when you're going back to more esoteric points of view, it doesn't matter what your religion is, whether you're Jewish, Christian, whatever. I think I've become more, I think, superstitious in this last 3 years than I have ever been. I think there's very, very evil stuff kind of happening in this world. If you look at, again, being interested in health and psychology and doing a lot in there, there is a theme of a use of psychedelics for things like depression. And if we look at some stories around DMT especially, you've had some kind of pioneers that are using it. There is a very strong theme of communicating with fourth dimensional entities. Okay, now whether this is all coming from inside us, whether it's external, whether there's aliens, I just don't know. But I do think that some of this stuff about this extra dimensional energy is valid. And I do think that there is an agenda, for want of a better word, at play to harvest negative energy. And I personally, again subjectively, don't think that the entities who are harvesting that negative energy, I don't think they're human. I think that there's something going on there, whether it's a genetic component in us, whether it is a extra dimensional thing, whether it's a demonic thing, I just don't have the answer. And sometimes it's helpful to speak from polars when we're talking about things. So what's bad, what's good, I don't know. It can be subjective for anybody, but I think there's many people who agree that some things are wrong. Okay, if you think, yeah, it's okay to kill another person, yeah, maybe you can make a case for that. But when it comes to hurting children, then you're crossing a line. You can go, okay, yeah, that's pushing a very negative boundary. And then when you think of maybe killing a child, oh, that's kind of taking it to a place that I think just about every person with any humanity would say, okay, you're crossing a line. Or if it came to torturing babies, I think everybody would think, holy shit, this is about as bad as it could get, okay? When we look at, again, some of our ancient history, there does seem to be a theme of child sacrifice from lots of different cultures. And I don't think that this is something that humans naturally had in their existence. I think this was something brought in to human existence in order to harvest our energy, okay? So when we start looking, I did a talk with the common law guys a little while back, but when you start, I always say this, but when you're looking at health, you cannot avoid looking at the history of the world and the economy in order to work out what's happening in the health system, okay? So when we start looking at things like child sacrifice, and we start listening to those crazy stories about the secret societies and the bankers and all these kind of things start to add up and things start to make sense. Okay, there's a book I reference often called The Creature from Jekyll Island, which is essentially the beginning of our financial system. And I lost a lot of money during the housing crisis. I had 4 properties. And I asked a lot of people these questions, these people who I presumed were cleverer than me at the time. And I said, listen, where did my money go? Okay, if I had property to value of $1 million at the time, and now it's worth 500 grand, 50% of that's gone. Where's it gone? And I got all these weird suggestions of, oh, listen, it's a future definition of value. I mean, well, it's not future. It happened. It happened right there. My property was worth this. Now it's not. Where's that money? It has to have gone somewhere. I never got a satisfactory answer until I read The Creature from Jekyll Island. So the reference about that is the fact that all the banks are owned by private families. Okay? So they lend money to the normal banks and to the government. They charge interest and they recoup that and take it back. Okay? And the banks already own the world a number of times over. Okay? Why is this relevant? It's relevant because they already own stuff. So what's the agenda? It has to be about more than money. It has to be about more than money. So then we look at what's called, we'll be doing a little segue into language in a little while. So interesting, we call money currency. That's not an accident. We look at what the currency is. okay? And once we get past money, there's maybe other things related to kind of currency that we're using. And that currency, I feel, is energy. And it's the harvesting of energy. And I feel that again, when we're looking at secret societies, and we're looking at Australia in particular, is a very, very interesting country. And as somebody pointed out to me a while back, it's on the doorstep of Asia, of especially Southeast Asia. And sporadically you can see in the papers these things popping up, and some of the things that are going on in relation to children and in relation to pedophilia in relation to Australia are just abhorrent. And Peter Scully, I don't know if anybody's heard that name. So this guy was, you know, torturing little babies on camera and selling the pictures to people online. And there's a guy in Scotland who does research about this stuff, and he was describing how there were tiers of membership for these videos, and the top tier of membership had 2 or 3 people in it, and you were literally he was charging something like £45,000 for top tier membership with 2 or 3 people. And these guys at the top would dictate how the child was tortured. Okay, and below that you might have 10 people for, I don't know, 10,000. Below that you might have just people who'd watch for 200-300. And this Scottish guy describes the fact that these places would sell out almost immediately. This is phenomenal. The fact that there is such an avid interest in this stuff, it just really blows my mind. Okay, and then you see that there's a lot of gangs and people getting busted in Australia. Okay. So again, it takes us back to that. I don't think people are naturally this evil, but I do think there is maybe an evil out there that is controlling people, and it does relate to the harvesting of energy. So why is that relevant? It's very, very relevant when we think that the way our history has been delivered to us is hell-bent on making sure that everything is a particle, everything is solid. Okay? And we have this very clear motive for as far as I can see, when we've had kind of modern knowledge develop about the importance of everything being solid. Okay, Darwin was a big factor in that. So Darwin, I think his mission was to tell us that there is no godliness or no spirit or no purity or no good, no esoteric in us, but that we essentially all come from animals. Okay, then we have people like Einstein, who is looking for the smallest particle, because it has to be solid. It can't be energy. I've mentioned the double slit experiment a few times, and something called the observer effect. I'm not going to go into that today, but that shows in normal scientific terms that our thoughts can change matter. This is normal science. Our thoughts can change matter. When we're talking about water in a little while, we'll see how that's very important. Who else? So then you have the notable Sigmund Freud, the grandfather of psychology. Okay, this guy basically injected this idea of, again, sexual perversion into our thoughts. Little girls want to have sex with their fathers. Little boys want to have latent desires for their mothers, etc., etc., etc. This idea that we're dirty, we're not pure beings, is something that's being pushed and pushed and pushed on us. Okay, and again, when we talk about dirt and germs, that's a whole other thing which we're gonna be jumping at soon. So the other notaries, the opposition to that, are people like Nikola Tesla. His work, quite incredible. So all this, I'm going to try and bring this together, okay? The reason this is so important is because if we look at the fact that we very likely had ancient, I personally have no doubt about the fact that we've had ancient technology, then we look at people like Tesla, we look at people like Nikola Kozyrev, very, very interesting guy. He's a Russian dude who he did most of his work in a concentration camp in Russia. And when he was released from there, all his theories that he did on a pen and paper with no equipment, many of them like the distance of the Earth from the Moon, all these equations were spot on. This guy sat in a cell for, I think, about something like 10 years. And he ended up getting some massive awards in the 60s and 70s because his theories were all spot on. And he's a very irritating guy for a lot of mainstream scientists, because what he used to do was he used to rig these gyroscopes up to his experiments, okay? And his gyroscopes were so complex that the tiniest little deviation would show a very, very statistical, recordable measure on these gyroscopes when he's looking at them. And he's got some in Russian, and I'm paraphrasing obviously, some quote saying, "When I think about the problem at hand. I notice a certain level of activity from my experiments, but when I happen to be thinking about my favorite song or music, I notice a significant shift in the results of my experiments. So this tells us that his thoughts it's verifiable that his thoughts can change how these experiments are working. Okay, our thoughts can change things. Okay, I took a long way to get to that little point, didn't I? Okay, so when we again look at these people who seem to have dropped into our culture, Aleister Crowley, anybody heard of this guy? Yeah, very, very, very sinister guy. This kind of father of witchcraft, and it had, you know, he kind of was quite famous. The fact that he got as famous as he did when some of the stuff that he was talking about, including pedophilia, is just absolutely beyond me. It's absolutely overwhelming. Who's heard of a fellow called Kinsey? Yeah, this guy is basically is responsible. I talked about this recently. He's responsible for the sexual education curriculum in America. This guy's responsible for it. And there's a documentary. Everybody should watch it. I'm trying to think what the name of it is. The Kinsey. It's got Kinsey in it. Feel free to. I'll give my details, and I've got links to this stuff. And his theory or his thesis on, you know, liberating sexuality amongst children was the fact that children can have orgasms, including babies. Okay, and his definition of orgasms in babies, including newborn babies, was if they scratched, if they cried, or if they writhed in ecstasy or pain. So this guy, if you read his definition of orgasm, he's talking about seriously torturing and harming babies and children. And this guy is still on a pedestal, on a platform in the US as an important part of culture. This guy should have been shot. Okay, there's no words bad enough. There's another guy called Money, I can't remember his first name, who was a psychologist who was throwing this idea out of this absolute nurturing in relation to gender. Okay, and there's a very interesting documentary on this guy where he had the perfect experimental setup of these two little boys in Canada, and unfortunately one of them got circumcised and ended up losing his penis due to circumcision as a little baby. So this Money had access to these two identical twins where he could perform his experiments on nurture and nature. So he convinced the family to raise one of the little boys as a girl. And it was an absolute disaster. The little boy who, I think one of them got schizophrenia, the other ended up they both ended up committing suicide. Okay? So it was an abject failure, and his work is still being used to promote this transgender stuff that we're seeing now. Okay? And again, when we take that little murky kind of backward step, we look at Baphomet. And Baphomet has got both male and female organs. It's transgender. So I think that this stuff is a homage to an evil entity. Okay? Now, whether there is an esoteric fourth dimensional character out there called Baphomet that's shaping the world, I don't know. But the big thing is, and I say this all the time, is if the people who are running the world believe in it, and if they're carrying out ceremonies based on that, it's affecting us. Especially when these guys are controlling our narrative, and they're controlling our history, and they're controlling our schools, and they're controlling our societies, and they're controlling our churches. Okay, so it is important for us to be aware of it. And then we can start thinking about health and how the health narrative may be corrupted at a very, very high level, and how the cult of allopathic medicine is being created. Okay? So who controls health? The Rockefeller Institute, and we talked about the Flexner Report. I have at least talked about the Flexner Report previously. This is where the allopathic structure came from. Look up that later because I've already talked about that. But again, the Rockefeller Institute established the school system in America, okay? And essentially it's based to keep people stupid, to keep people dumb, to keep people existing as if they work in factories. Okay. And the other thing, I've just made I've got a few random notes in here, so they're kind of a little bit tangential, but I'll get back on track. But another thing that I've noticed is, and if you look at this, a lot of your famous people seem to have a child who died. And I often wonder, is that some contract with an extra-dimensional entity, or the gang who tell them they have to sacrifice for fame and fortune? I don't know. I think it's very possible. You've got a lot of these old fables like Rumpelstiltskin, where you sign a deal with the devil just about, and it all backfires. I think there's a little bit of merit to this stuff. Okay, some technology. We talked about Tesla. I've no doubt about free energy. No doubt about hydrogen being used in engines. You can see this stuff online. You can actually see links where you can actually build these kind of engines. So there is never a motive for us to have free energy. If we have free energy, we can kind of do what we want. If we got to pay for petrol, it keeps us trapped. It keeps us enslaved. Okay? If we have perfect health, we may be able to think outside the box. We may be able to do stuff that doesn't get us trapped. But if we're compromised from a health point of view, we're easy to control. So this is where the agenda comes in, to keep our health low, our energy and our vibrations low, and to keep us dependent on stuff like petrol and electricity. Okay. This is a quote from a fellow called John Castimatidis, I think, CEO of a United refining company. Okay, this guy's a multi-billionaire. He's quite infamous, and he has a quote along the lines of, "If anybody still believes that oil comes from fossil fuels, they're crazy. Basically, we know that oil is renewable." And this is one of the biggest CEOs of one of the biggest oil companies in the world in an interview telling us this: oil is renewable. Okay.
From what, sorry?
Oil is renewable.
Oh, renewable.
Yep, oil is renewable. It's not a fossil fuel. All these little microorganisms sitting around the bottom and rotting and giving us oil is bullshit. Oil is a renewable resource. I've seen. Listen, I'm not. There's a few different theories, and I have looked at it a while back, and I'm not sure I can put it into enough for context to make any sense. But from what I gather, it's a byproduct of our interaction between Earth movement and water and Earth itself. Okay, and it's been continually created, and some people describe it as almost the one or the other. I can't remember which. Oil is like the blood of the earth, and the water is like the lymph, or vice versa. Okay, so they work in harmony with each other, from what I gather. But the exact process about how which is created, I'm not really too sure. Okay, so. And there's a guy who had Thomas Brown. Look at these patents. He's got all these patents for electromagnetics and levitation and things like this. There's so many examples of these different people who have done these incredible things with science and with magnetism. But again, if this gives us free energy, they don't want that. There's a lot of evidence. Some of these people who were killed fairly mercilessly and ruthlessly after they invented stuff that could be used for the better good of the world. Okay. When we were talking about electromagnetic energy, who's heard of cymatics? Anybody? It's interesting stuff. Cymatics are where you have these bases, and you hook them up to sound frequencies, and you throw sand on them, and you can change to these different frequencies to see all these absolutely incredible patterns. Okay, and the reason I mention this is because who's heard of 432 hertz frequency? And 440. Okay, it's very interesting. So there's quite an interesting debunking video where, like, I've got a guitar. I tune my guitar to 432, and that gets debunked because people, with some validity, point out that when you're doing your different chords, your different scales and notes, your notes are combining anyway. So it doesn't really matter what your instrument is tuned at. It's just a fallacy because we're playing up and down scales. But when you actually tune your music to 440, which is what we're meant to tune it, and do that with cymatics, your beautiful sacred geometry shapes become really polluted. Okay, so even though logically we can throw these theories out, when you see this cause and effect, you got to go, hang on a second, there's something to this. It's interesting that it was the Vatican who put out to change the frequency of music back in the day to 440. Okay, still, I don't think it's any coincidence that the people behind the Vatican, that pedophilia is rife in those societies. These organizations have been taken over, whether it's by a higher power or people who believe in a higher power. As I said, I don't know. When we look at our DNA, there's evidence that there is no smallest particle. There's evidence that it's all frequencies. There's evidence that all this information is stored in our DNA. Okay, it's quite interesting with chickens. When chickens hatch, as soon as they're out of an egg, you can build something that looks like a little bird. Okay, if you turn it one way, it looks like an eagle, and if you turn it another way, it looks like a goose. Okay, as a shadow on the ground. And you put this over the little chickens, they run if it looks like a shadow of an eagle. They're just born, and they are comfortable if it looks like the shadow of a goose. So we have this inherent knowledge that we can get passed down through our DNA. These things are just factual. We're told that this is not possible. If you look at epigenetics, there's a lot of information about epigenetics, and this whole fallacy about genetics is the evidence is very, very poor. Your parents had cancer, they had arthritis, well, you're going to get it. This keeps the medical industry happy. All that stuff is toxicity, which I've talked about a lot in the past. Okay, let's get to some. When we're talking about frequencies, then we can also talk about frequencies come from our bodies. Okay, they also come from our throats. They come from our mouths. Okay, it's no coincidence to me that when we talk about words, we're talking about spelling. So we're casting spells. Okay, on its really simplest level, my words can create magic. I can ask somebody to do something, and they do it. My voice has controlled or did something to cause an action. I think it runs much deeper than that. There's a bit of a suggestion that every culture has got a Shakespeare character in the culture. The French have it, the English have it, and nobody can identify who Shakespeare was. So was he made up? And the idea is that these pivotal characters in the language of different countries were there to reshape the meaning of our words and our language, to be able to control us easier. And this is where we go into what's called Black's Law Dictionary, and legalese. And we've now been indoctrinated to think that legalese is normal language. Legalese comes from Black's Law Dictionary, okay? And when we look at the meanings of words in that, it's quite incredible what they actually mean. So I'm going to segue to a little bit of law stuff, which I was asked to do. So we kind of just bounce around a little bit. So essentially, the highest law is biblical law. This is the highest law. Then underneath that, you've got law of the air, you've got law of the sea, and you've got law of the land. And this is where common law, what it's based on. There's elements, everything that we do and everything that we engage in, and this relates very much to karma, is a contract. Okay? So we have to be aware that anytime we're engaging with people, we're entering into contracts, especially the guys who are kind of pulling the strings and controlling us, the governments and the governmental systems. And there's different types of rules to contracts which we should all be aware of. Okay? One of them is contracts have to be between like kind. So I can't make a contract with a dog. It has to be another person, and I use the air quotes a little bit deliberately there, okay? I don't know if you know, but a person in Black's Law Dictionary is described as a monster with no rights. This is why all the contracts that we're given, we're described as persons. They don't want us to be humans, because with humans, we are under God's law, and we have rights. We have unalienable rights if we're humans, okay? This is why we have corporations. That's why we have the word corp, which is corpse, which is dead. Oration is talking. Corporation, okay? So this is why we have, this is very relevant to how our names are written. They're written in a thing called dog Latin, which is in capitals, which defines that we are agreeing that we're dead, so we can talk to corporations, okay? We're not allowed to, well, you can't really have a contract if you have a human and a corporation talking together, okay? For a contract, you should have full disclosure. Let's look at what's happening with these jabs. We ain't getting full disclosure. You also have to have a meeting of the minds. We have to be agreeing on the conditions of a contract. And there should be a giving and receiving from every single contract. So there should be an equality in a contract, okay? But here's the thing. If we don't contest something, we do something called acquiescing. And if we say nothing, we're acquiescing. So we are agreeing legally. This is one of the rules of law of the sea. If we say nothing, we've agreed to the contract, okay? So I could, if I wanted to, say my time now starts at $45 an hour. If you're here for another hour, you owe me $45. And I can turn away, and if you don't contest that, I can take you to court and I can get $45. This is the way contractual law works, okay? Sorry? Yeah, yeah, or you can decline my offer. Absolutely, you can decline my offer. I haven't offered you a contract for that. You know, we look at the so-called laws. They're not laws; they're bylaws. They're sitting under laws because they're bylaws. We just presume they're laws. They're not. There's not very many laws that are around. Okay, we look at some of our words. Citizen, city. Zen is a municipal area. It means we are a resident. This means that we're residing as a citizen. We are deciding to reside in a particular area for commerce. Okay, citizenship. A ship is a vessel. Okay, we're agreeing to the rules of the law of the sea. Banks. What do we have at the side of a river? We have banks. Water flows through in a currency. What do we call money? It's a currency. It's a movement of energy. Okay? We look at the structure of the court system. It's an occult system. It's based on all these rules. We have sandbars. What do attorneys and lawyers have to do? They have to cross the bar. Okay? So as soon as we enter a court, we are entering into this legalese system, this occult system, and we are summoned. This means we're called from the dead. Okay? It's very, very interesting stuff. I've got a fair bit in here, so I'm going to try and just shorten it just a little bit, otherwise you guys might fall asleep. I hope you don't. Sorry? Interesting so far? Thank you. Okay, there's a big organization called Dun and Bradstreet. They're a credit reporting system. Okay, everybody here, including me, has numbers in this system. Okay, all our countries have our numbers in the system. All our states, all our towns, they all have numbers in this. They're registered corporations. Okay, as I said, we're vessels. Your zip code has been put there by the post office. And when you have your zip code on anything, or your what's it called, sorry, in Australia? Your postcode, yeah? Yeah, you're agreeing that you're a resident. You're agreeing to maritime law. If you put your postcode in brackets, or in a box, squared off, anything in a box on a contract means it's separate to the contract. So start boxing your postcode, okay? A minor, somebody who is under 18, okay? But it's also somebody who has not claimed their minor estate, okay? We had something called the Cystic KV Act. Anybody heard of that? Okay, so basically it was this act that was put into place 1766, I can't remember exactly, but essentially it was put into place so that we were all born as a corporation with a fund, an insurance fund attached to us. And nobody has claimed. Some people have tried, some people have been killed, some people have gone to prison, but essentially, because we don't know about this, we can't claim our estate. So this is why we're classed as minors. It's interesting that we have tick boxes and stuff. If you put a tick in a box, it means you're an imbecile. Because that's how imbeciles sign things. They put an X or a cross on something. So all the structure of stuff is meant to put us in our place. Okay? They want us kept down.
Even like submitting on forms, when you're submitting your giving away your power.
Yep. Correct. You're submitting. That's exactly right. Absolutely. A baby is tugged, okay, like a little boat from the birth canal. It's called the birth canal, okay? And then you have a doc tender or a doctor. A physician cannot sign a birth certificate. Did you know that? It has to be a doctor. That's why there's two different names for that. A doctor and a physician. It has to be a doctor that signs a birth certificate, okay? When the paperwork's signed, for the parents to sign it, they're called an informant. Have you noticed that? The paperwork is called an informant. So an informant is somebody who gives information about another to give them up. So they put this system. There's a fellow called House, a Colonel House from memory, back in about the 1940s. And I'm paraphrasing the hell out of this one, but he had this little quote that we have set that he's the one responsible for a modern day system in about the 1930s or 40s, just from memory. And he's got some quote where he says that this system is so complex and brilliant that almost nobody will ever figure this out that we have enslaved them, and for the ones that can figure it out, people will think they're crazy. So the level of deception is so deep, runs so deep. So this is part of what I like to do, is to try to open the door to some of this so some people can start looking at it. Yeah, all our birth certs have a QSIB number, which again means that we are all corporations. We're all under control. We have hospital wards that they want us born in. What's the word ward? A ward of the state. Okay? Hospital wards. This means that we're under their control. It means that we're incompetent. Attorney. The definition in Black's Law for an attorney is an actor to a turn. And a turn means to steal from one and give to another. Okay? This is the system. When we start looking, you're shaking your head. Damn right. Damn right. When you start looking at this stuff, holy cow. Okay? When you're pulled up by the police. So all crimes are commercial. They're all commercial. Okay? They all come from the law of the sea. Okay? And they are based on this following kind of diagram. There's a presumption. Excuse me. Knock, knock, knock. What speed were you doing? They're presuming that you're breaking the speed limit. Okay? By not contesting or by entering into discussion or by accepting a contract, you are doing something called tacit agreement. Tacit agreement. So you've automatically entered a contract. Okay? And when it comes to the elements of the assumption, it's hearsay. So you have a person you've assumed authority over you, who is pulling you up, and it's based on hearsay. I think that you broke the speed limit. Where's your evidence? Here's an interesting thing, by the way. Asking. As king, you can never enter into a contract if you ask a question. So if I said to you again about my time, $45, if you say to me, well, Dennis, that's interesting. How did you come up with that? You have not entered into a contract with me. Asking a question. So we always ask questions of the police. We ask questions in court. Okay? So you have the rule of three as well. The rule of three applies to everything contractual. If you ask 3 times and it's not answered, you can assume that something's been agreed to. Okay, this is why you get your first notice, second notice, and final notice with bills of debt collectors. All interesting stuff. I got a fair bit more on that, but I'm going to kind of get back to the other stuff because how are we doing for time? Are we 10 to 5? So we started around 4ish. So about kick it on for about another 10-15 minutes. Okay, cool. But yeah, what I've just said to you guys there is absolutely touching the tip of the iceberg in this stuff. It just runs so deep. And the other thing I'd say as well is that the people who use this stuff, a lot of them can get burned. But I'd rather know about this stuff than not know about it, because at least it gives us some more options. But there's people who have been killed for this. There's people who are in jail still because of this stuff, be trying to action it and try to use it. But you can still take basic principles out of it and you can still apply it. I haven't, fortunately, had the opportunity to use this. But I would certainly start having this in the forefront of my mind as opposed to just agreeing things in the future. I mean, I think of these instances in the past where I would have not, had as many consequences to things that I thought I had no right over, okay, if I'd known some of this stuff. So I think it's absolutely important to know about it. The more you know, the better, I think. Okay. So it's important to remember that our language, we've been bred and we've been schooled to talk the language of the dead. Okay? So we need to start thinking about our language, about our speech, the fact that we're spelling, that we are creating different vibrations. Speaking more about frequencies, a recent study came out in a German university, Kassel University. And I never knew this, I was really surprised about this. But our hearts emit photons. Who knew that? Okay, the average, yeah, I didn't know. Incredible. Our hearts emit about 20 to 30 photons a second, pieces of light. A piece of light is called a photon, okay? And for people who are very good at meditation, or people in an extremely loving state, you can emit up to 100,000 photons a second from your heart. This is incredible. This is proper scientific university stuff. Okay, so I talked about this in one of my last chats about this 6 foot rule. It's been put there deliberately. We're all emitting not only photons but other types of energy. Kirlian photography is an interesting one. We're always emitting different types of energy. You guys in close proximity are all connecting in ways that we are told doesn't work or we're not meant to understand. It's very, very important. This is why community is very, very important. It's why we have to connect. We have to share ideas. I sometimes mention a fellow called Baxter in The Secret Life of Plants as another example. Who knows much about that guy? It's just phenomenal what this guy identified. He was a what's the guy called who has the lie detectors? The lie detector guy. Yeah. Anyway, so he was one of these guys. Was it a crypto? I can't remember. So he was just bored and he hooked these lie detector stuff up to plants, and he started doing weird stuff with the plants. I can't remember what the first thing he did, and he noticed that the plants were stimulating these lie detectors. So then he was doing stuff like chopping the leaf off a plant, and the plant was going crazy. So then he would chop a leaf off another plant. Both plants would go crazy. Okay? Then he was doing weird stuff like taking saliva from somebody, putting it in an airplane, causing pain to the person on the ground. The saliva in the plane would react. Okay? There's an interconnection for all these things, an interconnection with all the world. It is absolutely phenomenal, and we're all told it's all material and there's no good, there's no nothing. There's more out there than we think. So we look at the Akashic records, what that's meant to be, this store of knowledge. I think we probably have that in our DNA. We're getting poisoned and poisoned and poisoned, so our ability to access these things is heavily compromised. Okay, so a thing called hydrocephalus. It's an interesting one. Water in the brain, yeah. A fellow called Clearmans, he was a psychologist. This guy in France went to see him because he had weakness in his leg, I think, from memory. And they ran tests on this guy, civil servant, fully functioning, normal guy, driving to town, all this kind of stuff, doing whatever a normal person does. On his CT scan, he had hydrocephalus. More than 90% of his grey matter was water. This is in a medical textbook. It's written in the Lancet. There's a medical paper on this. Essentially, no brain. And he's functioning normally. And that's not the only example. There's other examples. There's a girl, 2014, in China. She went to the doctor for dizziness. 50% of her brain, water. Okay? Another instance of a woman in America. I haven't got the details there, but I read about this a little while ago. Same thing, up to 80% of her brain not there. She was functioning. There's a little kid in Scotland, Murray, I think from memory was his name, and he's, again, more than 70% of his brain is just not there. This is in 2013 when that was found, so he is quite compromised, but he can still walk and he can still play. Sorry, I'm not sure if he can walk, but he shouldn't be alive. Okay, there's a theory from a fellow called Ruggiero, who does a lot about the gut microbiome. So again, I was told this, that the brain is this area that has no bacteria. It's pristine, it's sterile. It's actually incorrect. We have bacteria in our brain, and it is very, very important. We die without it. So this guy, Ruggiero, has the idea that this phenomena where these people shouldn't be alive, that their consciousness is being helped out by these bacteria in this fluid in these people's brains. Okay? So this is very interesting when we start being told that everything is dirty. We've got to clean it. We've got to kill the bacteria. Got to wash your hands. It's a thing called the hygiene hypothesis with children. Dirty kids don't get allergies. It's been known since the 70s. Okay? Spray everything, clean everything. There's viruses. There's bacteria. Okay? So these things are here to help us. These bacteria are here to help us. Okay? And what are we doing? We're sterilizing and killing everything. Imagine if there's some sort of sentience in these bacteria that might be helping these people with hydrocephalus. Maybe there's a much bigger picture and we're getting to attack that. I don't know. It's good to be aware of this stuff. Puts a whole spin on a lot of different things, especially this interconnected thing. Who's heard of Joe Dispenza? Incredible stuff. He's I think it's Monash University. He's doing a lot of work with them. So essentially, this guy had absolutely smashed the hell out of his spine. He's a chiropractor. Sat in hospital for months. He was offered all sorts of complex spinal surgery. He was told he'd be in a wheelchair for the rest of his life. He sat and meditated and healed his spine. He's fully well now. So he's taught people his skills. He went on a lot of different journeys, talked to a lot of people about, I guess, this incredibly powerful healing meditation which he teaches. So he has these multiple thousands of scans of people that enter his seminars before and after. And Monash University basically has admitted that he can reproduce the same sorts of brainwaves that people who are absolute experts in meditation take years and years to produce. He does this in a few weekends. And he actually talks himself, he listens to some of his interviews about fourth dimensional entities and whatnot as well. Whether that's something coming from inside of him or something external, I don't know. So to then and just we're going to close up very soon, but another little note I made here was it's quite interesting for me of this regime, especially with the medical industry, just to start to chop stuff off us, to take things out of us. Take away your gallbladder. It's a really important organ. Take away your tonsil. It's the first line of defense. Okay? Your pineal gland. Okay? It produces melatonin. Looks like it produces DMT. It's an incredibly important gland. Fluoride, by the way, calcifies it. I presume everybody knows that by now. But we've got these crystals in the inside of our ear. You never hear these things getting mentioned. Okay, as an example, with these crystals in our ear, if people think they can hear dolphins underwater, it's been proven that you actually don't hear dolphins underwater with your normal hearing. It's actually a frequency that these crystals in your ear pick up. We confuse it with normal hearing. It's not. It's a different sort of hearing. Okay, so there's lots of these incredible phenomena that we are just never told about. Okay, the body is incredible. So when we think about how consciousness can control things and these strange phenomena and these strange kind of technologies and all these other things, what we have to be careful of is our power of manifestation. And if we are stuck in these paradigms and these little boxes of, you're going to get old, you're going to get sick, we have genetics, we have this, we are manifesting different realities. But when we start to peel back these layers, everything becomes kind of possible. And the more skilled we get at looking at it, and the more we kind of practice these things, maybe everything's possible. Maybe we can reverse aging. Maybe we don't have to grow old so quickly. Maybe we can get rid of cancer by thinking about it. Incidentally, a person I know directly got rid of a massive cancer in his leg by thinking it away. So either he's a big fat liar, and I looked at this person and I'm telling lies to you, or this thing happened. So I'm telling you, I'm not lying, so make of that what you will. But the doctors will tell you that's impossible. So to wrap up, the idea of this conversation was to just, I guess, throw open the lid to tell you guys that there is, and obviously I've got a YouTube audience as well, and I'll be showing this to them, that there is this world of infinite possibilities, okay? And when we start looking at the stuff that's being kept from us, or that's being corrupted, or the knowledge that's being corrupted, we can maybe say, hey, hang on, there might be a bit more to this. And once we start going down these avenues of thinking, the idea is to open up these possibilities for us, to not only to raise our own vibrations, but to affect the people around us and to try and get a bit of a positive change happening in the world. Thank you for listening.